The Jesuit Order, one of the most powerful religious organizations in the world. Yet their founder, a courageous knight nearly killed by a cannonball, reborn as a general for the Pope. This wounded soldier dodged death to pursue a new mission, trading fighting foes for hunting heretics. Once among the most powerful men in the world, he built a world-spanning force for evangelism that shaped the Papacy for centuries. Skeptics might question such saints now, their motive and power, but his legacy as the mastermind behind the Jesuits endures. So how did a shattered leg ignite a spiritual empire? Welcome to Holy Histories. This is the story of St Ignatius of Loyola. It's 1491 in Azpeitia, a gritty Basque stronghold nestled in Spain's northern wilds. Inside a hulking stone castle, a newborn's wail cuts through the clamor of a noble family. Inigo López de Onaz y Loyola arrives, the youngest of 13 in a tough clan. These aren't dainty courtiers, they're Basque warriors, nobles who've stared down kings and carved their name into the Pyrenees. His father, Beltran, ruled with an iron fist, while his mother's early death left an aunt to care for him. Growing up, Ignacio is the live wire, always scrapping around, getting into mischief, with a glint in his eye that promises trouble. He had ambition, too. See, Basques didn't bow down easy. Ignacio inherited that spine. He dreamt of chivalry, glory, and swooning damsels, his head full of tales of knights and epic quests. Despite being highly educated and tutored, his passion was to be out in the dirt, exploring and plotting a life bigger than the rugged hills that surrounded him. As a teen, to round out his education, he was sent as a page to Juan Velázquez de Cuéllar, Castile's royal treasurer. For an ambitious young man to now be at the right hand of one of the most powerful regents in Europe was a heady experience. Here at the glittering courts of Arevalo, Ignatius mastered the art of the swagger. He had swordplay that dazzled, charms that disarmed, and a strut that turned heads. He was a teenage peacock, preening in velvet, learning to duel and dance with equal flair. By 1517, he was a well-trained 26-year-old soldier. He'd enrolled in the Spanish army years before. Vain? You bet. He spent hours fussing over his hair, polishing his armor, craving for the mirror's nod. He was also a gambler, tossing dice in smoky taverns, and a duelist, quick to slash over the slightest disagreement. Records whisper of a 1515 brawl in Guipúzcoa, him and his brother dodging the law after spilling blood in a street feud. This guy was no saint yet. Rather, he was a rogue, chasing fame and fortune. His family, though, were proud, seeing a future baron, a knight to hoist their banner high. But now, war's brutal dice were rolling, and a cannonball was about to cut his dreams short. On May 20th, 1521, Ignatius found himself in the heart of the fray. He was leading the Spanish soldiers in Pamplona in their struggle against the French. The opposing army was pounding the city. Cannons roared, walls crumbled, and screams pierced the smoky haze. Ignatius was a 29-year-old knight, rallying the Spanish garrison, living his dreams of chivalric pride until a wayward blast. Amidst the chaos, a cannonball ripped through the fog and headed straight for him. It smashed his right leg to a pulp. Bones snapped, flesh tore, blood pooled. His left leg caught shrapnel too, and he went down hard as the French stormed the breach. His comrades dragged him back to the castle, a broken heap. Immediately, surgery was performed. His fever raged, and surgeons hovered like grim reapers. There was no anesthesia, just saws and knives hacking at the wound, trying to reset his mangled limb. By some miracle, they managed to reset the bones, but the bones on one side would always be crooked and short. He was bedbound for months. His pride was in the gutter. The swaggering strut was gone, now he's a cripple at 30, stuck staring at castle walls. Bored out of his skull, he begged the nurses looking after him for books, romance novels, tales of knights and damsels to salvage his pride. Instead, some pious soul handed him a book about the life of Christ and another one about the lives of saints. Dry stuff, he thought, until he cracked them open. something shifted. Reading about Christ's grit and the saints' guts, Thomas, Catherine, Augustine, visions flickered in his fevered mind. When he put down the book, he was trying to think on chivalry and romance and knightly pursuits, but he found his mind wandering back to the lives of the saints again and again. Something grew in him, a sense of purpose whispering that there's more to this life than silk and steel. By 1522, he was done moping and had recovered, but was unsure of where his life should go. So, naturally, he abandoned everything, leaving his family and his wealth to go on a long, very, very long pilgrimage to clear his head. He traded his armor for rags and limped his way to Manresa, a dusty town with a cave that called his name. There in the dank hollow, he decided to fast from food and water for a week until God answered his prayers. He was a wild man, praying 7, 8, even 9 hours a day until his knees bled. Visions came in floods and he scribbled it all down. It was during this period that he wrote the notes for his first great work, The Spiritual Exercises, a battle plan for strengthening the soul. He wasn't on a knightly quest anymore, but a mystic's war. From soldier to seer, Ignatius shed his old skin, slowly at first and then all at once. That cannonball didn't just break his leg, it cracked open his world. But our busted knight is still no papal protege, so what brewed in Manresa that would shake Rome itself? In fact, this crippled pilgrim was only just getting started. We all have a mission. And perhaps, like us, your mission is to share the stories that matter most. That's why I'm delighted to be partnered with YouGrow Studio. YouGrow Studios is a unique, bespoke video production service that takes your video idea from vision to completion. With a team of expert scriptwriters, editors, thumbnail artists, and specialists, they turn your vision into reality in one simple package with low-cost subscription options. With a link in the description, you too can begin a new YouTube journey with a free video consultation to get you started and a free profile picture and channel banner when you sign up. To new growth this new year with YouGrow Studios. It's 1526, and Ignatius, now 35, is a man on the move. He's been a scruffy pilgrim for years, learning through practice what it means to live out faith. He tried every discipline and experimented with the teachings of all the saints, settling on his own personal mix of disciplines and devotions. He found a deep belief that holiness was in fact an exercise in finding God in everything. Having found God in nature and the wide open roads, he decided it was time to find God in education once more. He traveled city to city, checking in at every library he could get his hands on, reading manuscripts and researching philosophy and theology. On the way, he preached wildly, sharing his disciplines and exercises with anyone who would listen, telling people to seek the face of God in even the smallest flower. But he had trouble coming his way. These were the days of the Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic Church was fighting back against the Protestant Reformation, and few with such vengeance as in Spain. He was picked up twice by the Spanish Inquisition and interrogated for heresy due to his odd teachings. He was too wild, too mystic. He was ultimately cleared, but determined to build his academic chops and argue his case more effectively, he traveled to the university in Paris in 1528. Pushing 40, the hobbled fighter struck a strange figure against the scholars, priests, and students that gathered there. Having abandoned his family, he was dirt poor and had to beg for bread to survive. Still, it was at the university that he met 6 unlikely brothers-in-arms who changed the game. They were an odd crew, but drawn to Ignatius because of his spiritual exercises, and saw that with him there was more than meets the eye. His tales of knighthood to pilgrimage were real and raw, none of the protected cloistered monk nonsense. Slowly but surely, a brotherhood formed, bound by the purpose of practical closeness to God. On August 15th, 1534, these 6 took the plunge. In a dim chapel, they knelt, rags on, resolve blazing. They swore themselves to poverty, chastity, and obedience to the Pope, birthing the sparks of the Jesuit Order. Ignatius molded them, not to hide in abbeys, but to strike where faith was needed, arguing with heretics, heathens, and seeking healing for the fractured world. Still, this ragtag band of brothers and a would-be heretic are nowhere near building the brand that became an empire. No, this wild pilgrim is just warming up the war. After 6 years, their small group had grown enormously. In 1540, Ignatius, now 49, was a weathered warrior, his limp a badge of battles past. Those cave-born spiritual exercises were now the backbone of a disciplined machine, mentoring, discipling, and preparing Christians for mission in the world. The Counter-Reformation had reached a fever pitch, and Pope Paul III, a cagey politico neck-deep in Protestant chaos, was desperate for new approaches. Enter Ignatius and his all-grown-up band of warrior priests. Their pitch? Total loyalty, poverty, chastity, and obedience to the Pope, in exchange for a new formal order and an office that reported directly to him. They would commit themselves to sniffing out heresy wherever it might appear. On September the 27th, 1540, Paul III stamped the Jesuits official, Regimini Militantis Ecclesiae, preparing the way for Ignatius to become one of the most influential men in the world. Ignatius was quickly elected superior general by the council, and he was ready to be the church's warlord. The first order of the day was formalization, a constitution and republishing his treaties like spiritual exercises. The constitution was simple, no fluffy prayers, just iron obedience and brutal training designed to create the most effective evangelists in the world. And it was just in time to send these budding missionaries across Europe to respond to all of the Protestant heresies. The Jesuits leaped in as shock troops, debating Protestants till their throats burned, rooting dissent from taverns, slipping into king's confessionals, always keeping their ears cocked for betrayal. At the Council of Trent, they became the backbone that managed the crowds and eyed the dissenters. Their reach meant that not everyone was clapping. They made their way across Europe into politics and began to be feared even in the Curia. They weren't violent per se, but they were often accused of conspiracy and cunning and overreach, though the Pope was delighted with their performance. But as General Ignatius viewed his growing network and the influence it gave him, the reach it gave the Pope, he believed it was time to dream even bigger. This general was about to become a global emperor. By the 1550s, Ignatius's wild dream was a roaring blaze. His Jesuits had cracked Europe wide open, preaching, teaching, sniffing out heresy like bloodhounds. Now the Pope's got bigger plans. Ignatius commissions his first wave of fresh recruits to sail across oceans, from India's steamy coasts, China's walled cities, to Japan's samurai lands, gospel in one hand, their grit in the other. These warriors of faith clawed their way across continents, with a number among some of the wary explorers to the Americas, planting crosses where none had ever been seen before. By 1556, the Jesuit Order hit 1,000 members with 35 colleges pumping out sharp minds from Rome to Goa. Ignatius ran it all from a cramped office in Rome, the Curia Generalizia, his war den. There was no plush throne there. He scribbled over 7,000 letters in total to keep the reins tight. Unlike other orders, they emphasized practice and flexibility, so had no monasteries to manage. Still, they were educated to the hilt and loyal to the Pope's every whisper. Protestants trembled at their mere mention, calling them the Pope's spies, heretic hunters with noses for reformist rancor. This was Ignatius at his height, a general turned emperor, his busted leg a distant ache. The cave-scribbling mystic had achieved his dream of becoming a great leader and a global titan, though certainly not in the way he'd expected. His book, Spiritual Exercises, echoed like a battle cry from Lisbon's cathedrals to Nagasaki's markets. Still, his body was crumbling. At 65, his lungs were wheezing, years of fasting gnawing at his frame. Despite this, knowing his time was nearing, he kept up work at a fierce clip, working feverishly to enact the papal will. But all things must come to a close. On July 31st, 1556, Ignatius, 65, lay in his sparse Curia room, fever-burning, body racked from decades of determination. He had no grand exit, just letting go to eternal rest after a life well lived. According to his wishes, he was buried simply, just dirt tossed over a dreamer. That said, they did later shift him to the Jesuit Church, which belonged to the Jesuits. So that's it, right? With the leading lights gone, the empire might be extinguished like a lamp in the night. But momentum's a funny beast. On the contrary, by 1580, 144 schools dotted the map. By 1615, it's 400. The well-oiled machine he constructed hummed away in his absence, spreading faith's fire wild. His unique contribution led to his sanctification in 1622, with a feast day on the day of his death on July 31st. Still, that unwieldy growth and the influence the Jesuits had in every corner sparked all sorts of whispering. So what's that about? How did the Jesuits grow to where they are today, and what controversies did they face that make St Ignatius' brow-raising decisions look minor? Of course, the Curia wasn't going to let the Jesuit Order, now significant and powerful in its own right, go to waste. The order continued to grow rapidly after Ignatius' passing, and gained huge funding from princes, kings, merchant philanthropists, and the Curia itself. But all this wealth led to some bloat, and whispers of corruption and spy-like influence in places that they shouldn't have been dabbling. There's not a huge amount of evidence of any of these claims, but one of the wildest is that of a black pope, that the Jesuits' superior general is actually the one pulling the strings, manipulating the white pope who's just the public face of the papacy. There's no doubt the superior general maintained a close relationship with popes, and that they coordinated closely on policy. But these conspiracy whispers are often tied to New Age or Gnostic theories about secret knowledge and Illuminati-like organizations operating behind the shadows. These whispers turned into a riot during the Enlightenment. Protestant suspicion of the Jesuits had long kept them at bay in Protestant North Europe. But then Enlightenment skeptics called out their influence on policy even in Catholic heartlands in the 1700s, leading to their expulsion from Portugal, Spain, and France due to fears about their loyalty to the papacy over the monarchy. Sure, they have scars, but today the Jesuits are open and still focus heavily on education and mission, with 16,000 Jesuit members globally running universities like Georgetown and Fordham. Their spiritual exercises bending souls in retreats from LA to Lagos. Rome's still their heartbeat. Ignatius' constitutions still steer the ship. They've shaped modern Catholicism, from Reformation intellect to global mission, baking service into its bones. And find God in all things isn't some dusty quote. It's their pulse, echoing from Ignatius' cave until now, a dream that built a priestly empire that's outlasted political ones. So Ignatius of Loyola, from wounded soldier to heretic hunter, was the founding father who became the general of the Jesuits, a missional, devoted servant of Christ that truly deserved his place in God's Holy Histories.